to the very special Halloween episode of Geek Week. When I was a kid, I grew up watching Cartoon Network, and every year in October, I would be excited to see what Halloween episodes would come from my favorite shows. And now that I'm older, I honestly miss that feeling, and I'm more curious about where this tradition started in the first place. Which is why I'm making this video, to honor this long-running tradition and to keep it going. With all that being said, let's go ahead and find out the evolution of Halloween specials. In order to fully understand where this tradition came from, let's go all the way back to 1952 with the Jackie Gleason Show, live-action television's first Halloween special. This episode was a 10-minute quirky sketch about how the main characters needed to get ready for a Halloween party. As expected, some characters dressed up quirky, others really problematic, and some just served charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent. At the end of the episode, the characters realized that while this party might be taking place on Halloween, it's actually a birthday party for the boss, and the attire is meant to be formal.
What do you mean costume? This is no masquerade, this is a formal dance.
All things considered, this is a very tame Halloween episode. They stay in one place the entire time. The jokes and the gags are very easy to follow. It's nothing revolutionary. Well, at least not now, but back then it might have been. The thing I like the most about it is how this special reveals clues of what Halloween was like back in the 50s. The set, like I said, never changes, but the dialogue really allows insight into the time period and what Halloween was seen as. Characters are used to making their own costumes, for example.
He's in the bedroom trying on the costume that I made for him.
In fact, that was a huge tradition back in the 50s. You wouldn't go to the store to buy a costume, you would piece it together at home. Trick-or-treating exists, and some Halloween parties seem to be costume-centric even 70 years ago. And if you look into Halloween's historic background, you'll see that the 50s is actually very crucial for the holiday. This decade is actually when the holiday became a kid-centric tradition. Kids would dress up as scary ghouls, witches, and goblins and go door to door asking for candy. Some even dressed up as their favorite comic book characters, such as Superman. Other kids did blackface. Yeah, the 50s definitely sucked, and it's important to bring up all of these horrendous things when we're talking about history, because we can't just ignore them, right? We can't just ignore the elephant in the room. But with all of that being said, let's continue forward. The 50s brought in a new era of Halloween. In fact, a lot of the colors, pictures, and other things that we associate with Halloween came to fruition in the 50s. During this time, America was in the midst of a Red Scare, which would eventually turn into a Cold War, reeling back in from the atomic age. Political tensions were at an all-time high, putting fear in the forefront of every American's mind. Fear that would manifest into racism, bigotry, and heinous acts against human beings. But you don't need me to tell you all this. You can just go down to the local library and get yourself a book, and then they're burning it. They're burning it, they're burning it. They're burning it. Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad that things are better now, right? Horror movies were at an all-time high during this period, bringing us classic gems such as The Thing from Another World, which would eventually be developed into The Thing by John Carpenter, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Blob, The Werewolf, and many, many more. Directors and writers used the fear of having a communist right next to your door to create cinematic masterpieces. A lot of the themes in these films have to do with invasion. Thing from Another World, some foreign creature comes to our planet and terrorizes us. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, they literally grab your fellow neighbor, convert them, and then put them back out in the world. The Werewolf is as simple as we don't know if Dave down the hill is going to turn into a werewolf when the full moon's out. But you might be asking yourself, how does any of this relate to Halloween? Well, during this time, we also saw a rise in horror comedies, with films like Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. Films like this would help shift the public perspective of Halloween. They essentially helped push the narrative that this was a more family-oriented holiday. With this new perspective, Halloween was being celebrated by more families across the nation, prompting live-action television shows at the time to create Halloween specials. This would take off and create a tradition of its own. In fact, these episodes became so popular that whole shows based around them would be created. Now, I'm not saying that there was a show based off of a Halloween party from the Jackie Gleason Show, but The Twilight Zone was heavily inspired by these more scary episodes, or supernatural episodes. And then even these supernatural shows would also have Halloween episodes. But while all of this was going on, for the past 20 years, cartoons had already been doing this. You see, back in the 1930s, we were getting Halloween episodes from shows like Mickey Mouse, Popeye, and Betty Boop. Now, in the modern day, it's extraordinarily rare to see a TV show not have a Halloween special. But what used to be a fun Halloween gag is now turned into episodes that try and scare you. As Halloween became more and more popular, the scare factor would greatly increase. What started off as a way to ward off evil spirits with offerings became a time to celebrate fall, which has now become, again, all about the frights and the scares. But when did this happen? With the creation of color television and the graphic news coverage of the Vietnam War, audiences were suddenly subjected to violence that had never been seen before on television, opening the doors for directors to start making more raunchy and horrific TV and film. It wouldn't take long for the horror genre to change forever with John Carpenter's Halloween, released in 1978. Thus began the age of the slasher, and not long after we would see many more appear, such as Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Child's Play. Suddenly, slashers were the new craze, and Halloween had become a time to scare individuals rather than to celebrate with children. With this new perspective gaining popularity, TV took notice and started adjusting how these specials were written. And while I couldn't track down the first account of a TV show using these slasher filming methods, I can tell you of some cool examples. Back in 1988, Roseanne had its first Halloween episode entitled Boo. It uses classic slasher tropes, which of course were relatively new at the time, and it had a central focus on scares. Now, before we continue with this analysis, it's really worth mentioning that Roseanne Barr is a terrible person. She's been in a lot of controversy for being one of the most racist people on television, so if you are going to go watch this, I recommend the high C's, if you know what I'm talking about. Yar har. But let's go ahead and continue. This episode features a far more complex plot than that of the Jackie Gleason show. In this episode, Roseanne and her husband John Goodman, I don't know the character's name, and I guess I could look it up. I'll look it up right now, actually. Dan. Roseanne and her husband Dan. Roseanne and her husband Dan have a competition where they try and scare one another, and meanwhile, their kids try and find their Halloween spirit. And while most sitcoms would stay away from blood, gore, and other raunchy effects, Roseanne was no stranger to it. John Goodman's character Dan uses fake blood in the show to make it appear as if his thumb has been cut off. One of the children, I don't know their names, I'm not going to learn them, has a costume with sharp objects protruding out of it, with blood stains all around. Pretty graphic, pretty cool. And it's pretty significant because this shows that this is a big shift. Families were becoming more comfortable with gore being shown on syndicated television, even if it was fake within the fake world. One interesting parallel I noticed while watching this episode was the fact that John Goodman's character Dan has to have a talk with a work client during a Halloween party. You see, in the episode, the client wants to discuss some things about what Dan does. I think he's like some kind of architect or something. I don't fucking know. Construction worker, probably. But before the client can talk to Dan, he runs into Roseanne. Roseanne explains that she's been trying to scare her husband all day, and in other sitcoms, this would already be pretty ironic. The fact that we have a neatly dressed man amongst adults dressed as witches, ghouls, and what have you. After Roseanne explains that she's been trying to scare her husband all day, she asks for the client's help, and surprisingly, he agrees. They basically do some hijinks that makes it look like Roseanne is ruining the chances of having this client in front of Dan, and he's scared that he's going to lose the client, and it's this whole thing, and he's like, oh, you're dead, whatever. But the most important thing to take away from this scene is that it almost directly mirrors what we saw with the Jackie Gleason show. And whereas in the Jackie Gleason show, it was almost a mocking or cynical look at Halloween for adults, this was a fun-loving, family-oriented, it's for everyone. This showcases that Halloween is for everyone. And mind you, this conversation surrounding Halloween changed within a time span of 36 years. It essentially went from what sensible adult would celebrate Halloween to Halloween is for everybody. And this idea is reflected in the holiday even to this day. And I think we have film and television to thank for that. Speaking of modern day, if Halloween episodes of the past were influenced by the horror films at the time, is the same true for modern day Halloween episodes? To understand this, we need to look at the evolution of horror as a whole. It's interesting because if we look at the villains of horror movies over the decades, we go from foreign invaders to slashers to existential entities. And in the last 5 years, we've seen horror take on a more nostalgic tone. This is most likely due to the pandemic and the nation falling deeper and deeper into fascism every single day. Who wouldn't want to remember the good old days? In fact, horror is not the only media that has done this. I can make a whole other video about how nostalgia has completely overtaken everything we consume today, but let's just stay focused on horror. A good example of what I'm talking about, though, is that if you look at horror mainstream over the last couple of years, we can clearly see a trend. It's either been reboots or sequels, with the likes of Alien, Scream, Predator. All of the old slashers are coming back to haunt us. Even new films take heavy inspiration from films of the past. Take, for example, Smile, Longlegs, and Bring Her Back. All of these can be seen as the modern day Ring, Silence of the Lambs, and Exorcist. And not to say that these movies are carbon copies at all. These are amazing and they build off of these concepts in very, very interesting ways, which is honestly what all films do anyways. I think it's just an interesting thing to point out. Therefore, nostalgia has become a focal point for horror and horror writers, using what they grew up with and bringing those concepts into the modern world. Now, with all that being said, if horror is so nostalgia-based, do these specials of 2025 represent that? Well, interestingly enough, they do. I went ahead and watched the SpongeBob Halloween special that aired October 3rd, 2025, and compared it to the original one all the way back in 1999. What I found was that the 2025 episode has a heavy focus on nostalgia, using old assets from the original 1999 episode, such as costumes, title cards, and more, and even going as far as to create a gag for almost every known horror trope. Whereas the original one from 1999 had themes of self-mutilation, discovery of self, and demonic presence. And if you don't believe me, rewatch the episode. You'll find that SpongeBob mutilates himself to get into his costume. He discovers that he loves Halloween, and the Flying Dutchman appears, threatening to steal everyone's soul. All of these themes are represented in horror movies that were huge at the time, such as Blair Witch Project, Scream, and Nightmare on Elm Street. Another example of Halloween specials looking towards the past is ironically the 2025 Family Guy Halloween special. This episode centers around the holiday as a whole and what it used to be, albeit in a very leisurely sense. You see, Chris wants to trick-or-treat, Lois sets up an elaborate Halloween display, and Stewie and Brian try and write a new Halloween song to bring back those Halloween feelings. Eventually, Lois and the other wives don serial killer masks to scare Joe, Quagmire Peter, Chris, and Cleveland, using classic slasher tropes and campy setups. While this episode doesn't necessarily set itself up to scare you, it really does bring back those old nostalgic Halloween feelings, which is exactly what horror has been doing for the past couple of years. And within our modern society, events like Trunk or Treat are slowly killing the holiday off. So it makes sense that Halloween specials of today would look back at a time when Halloween was more widely celebrated. I mean, hell, my local Walmart didn't even wait a week to put out Christmas decorations after they already put out their Halloween display. And like I said, it's extremely sad to see. I mean, our capitalistic overlords have decided that Halloween is no longer profitable. And so we're seeing less and less of the holiday spirit. But that's why it's so important to keep this holiday going. Halloween formed an essential part of my childhood, as I'm sure it did for many of you. If you take anything away from today's video, please take away the fact that Halloween is extremely important. Decorate, hand out candy, dress up, celebrate it as much as you can, or even if you're able to. Because if you don't, the fright side might be lost forever.
Hannah, the bright side is falling apart at the seams. We need you to keep Halloween alive. Help us, Hannah. You're our only hope.
That's the video. I don't know how long this is going to be. I couldn't really find a good way to end it, but I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like. Make sure to subscribe. I have my setup all decked out in Halloween stuff. I got cobwebs. I got the spooky Halloween colors. But yeah, no, I really appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate you guys clicking on the video. Subscribe if you're new. And I can't wait to see you guys in the next one.